10:30. So if you're all sitting comfortably, we will begin. Stephen, for you too. Good morning. Right. Good morning, everyone, and to anyone watching on the webcast. Housekeeping first. As far as we are aware, there is no fire drill planned for this morning. So if the continuous alarm sounds, leave the building by the staircase and assemble in the Arthur Street car park at Assembly Point C. Do not hesitate to gather personal belongings and do not use lifts. Wait at the assembly point in the car park until the all clear is given to return to the building. The committee is being webcast. Can I remind members to press the button carefully once on the microphone before speaking and switch it off as soon as they are finished. Members are also reminded to make sure the microphone is close enough. Mobile phones should be switched off as they may interfere with the webcasting equipment. I don't think anybody's joining by Teams, so I think Gary, so that's not necessary. Okay. And we move on to item 1, which are apologies for absence. We haven't received any apologies, but we have got 2 replacements this morning. County Councillor Jennifer Mean has replaced County Councillor Nicky Hennessy for the meeting, or for this meeting only, and County Councillor David Wesley has replaced County Councillor John Singleton for this meeting. Thank you, both of you. Item 3 is disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Anybody anything to declare? Sorry, I've skipped item 2, yes. So, right, so let's note the constitution, the chair and deputy chair, and the membership, item 2. And it's just for noting. So I ask you to note that. Item 3, as I say, is disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Anybody declare anything? Right, okay. Item 4 are minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2021. So who was at that meeting, Gary? Thank you. Who else is there? Councillor Raleigh. You were at the meeting in March. Yeah, you're one of the few who were, so I like, can you set in the minutes? Thank you, so we know the minutes. Right, okay, so we move on to item 5, which is supporting Lancashire business during COVID-19. And we've got the cabinet member here for economic development and growth, Aidy Riggett, and he's going to introduce his team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. You can see on your report pack, bottom of page 15 and top of page 16, the subjects we're going to cover in the presentation. With us this morning, we have Andy Walker, who's going to lead on this, who is the head of business growth. Andrew Leeming, who's the growth hub team leader, and Amin Vapari, who's our senior project officer for business finance. So they're going to take you through the presentation. I believe we're taking questions at the end, I think is the plan. But just before we start, I wanted to just thank the guys here and the wider team, because as I'm sure you're aware, this has been a difficult area for council to provide services in over the last 18 months, like a lot of things we've done, and we've had to tailor what we've done and be flexible and change to adapt to needs. So I think I'd like that to be noted if the committee agrees to that at the end, Mr. Chairman. If that's okay, I'll pass to Andy, I think he's going to kick off.
Thanks, Eddie. Thank you. We circulated this presentation late last week, so apologies if people haven't had a chance to consider it over the weekend, but we'll take you through it. Just to give you a sense of the structure of what we'd like to cover today, just a reminder, if one is needed, of the sort of COVID timeline and how we've superimposed different sets of business support interventions through that period. A look at the national business support offer, really just headline review, but some really significant response and support for the business community coming through that. We'll then sort of defer to the local offer. It's not a comprehensive overview of the local offer, and we shouldn't downplay the role that district councils played with their own discretionary grants through the COVID period. But from the perspective of the county council, our main instruments were a set of European Regional Development Fund grants, which we distributed in the region of 1.5 million. And then a range of local business support provision, which Andrew will take you through from Boost, Lancashire's business growth hub. Moving on to the second half of the presentation, Amin will detail both the national financial support position and how that's impacted in terms of the way in which we're seeing business borrowing and equity as it currently stands. And then finally coming back to some early thoughts around the skills provision we put in place and the data, the economic data we're seeing as the economy moves forward. Obviously too early to say we're out of the COVID pandemic, but very much seeing an uptick around a number of areas, and also not seeing some of the damage that we'd anticipated around people returning from furlough. But we'll come to that later in the presentation. I'll hand over to Andrew to take you through the National Business Support Offer.
Hello, hi everyone. Hope you can all hear me. First time using these systems. So, right now, as you are no doubt aware, we've been incredibly impacted in terms of service delivery around how we can help businesses as they start to navigate through the whole challenges that COVID threw up within their businesses. We did this really quickly. So on the day of lockdown being called, we created the Ask for Help campaign, which was a single campaign aimed at any business in Lancashire. So hopefully you guys are aware that normally our support is generated towards B2B, business to business. But clearly, because of COVID, every single business across Lancashire was impacted, and it felt wrong for us not to be there to support them at a time of national crisis. So we quickly made sure that all of our services were available to every business across Lancashire. Only light touch, but if a business was in distress, needed to talk to someone, made sure that the Growth Hub of Lancashire was there to support them at their time of need. Obviously, also, as you can see on the slides, there was a whole bunch of stuff that nationally was coming into play as well. Quite clearly, the Growth Hub had a role to play in terms of helping businesses navigate and understand what was available to them, particularly as they have their heads absolutely inside their business. We don't always get the opportunity to look around at what becomes available to them. So we wanted to leverage in the good support and the goodwill that we had with the Lancashire business community to make sure we knew they could and have those conversations with us. So you can see we had the support like the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, the job retention scheme or furlough, as now everybody is aware of, self-employment income scheme, coronavirus large business interruption scheme, business holiday rates, retail, hospitality, that was through local authorities. There's a bunch of cash grants that were being made available to businesses, again distributed through local authorities, small business funding, statutory sick pay rebates, support for businesses paying tax, and obviously corporate financing services through the Bank of England, business rate holidays for nurseries, VAT deferral, and other things like the deferral of self-assessment paying. All these things were being pushed out to businesses, and some businesses were absolutely on top of it, particularly if they had other systems in play. But those that was small didn't always have time to get hold of kind of what that impact meant for them as a business. And again, we made sure that they could simply just call Boost through the Ask for Help campaign and navigate through that with someone that will give them a listening ear and help them navigate through to the right people. We also at the time had some conversations around how we can better use the local ERDF grant stuff. At the time, I remember them saying we'd like to put out some loans to businesses that have been impacted, so we can go off and make some adjustments because of the impact of COVID on them. And obviously here in Lancashire, we shoved our hand right up there as wide as we could so that we could get seen. And so we'd absolutely be up for delivering out a grant scheme on the basis through the local European funding. So that was announced back in July 2020. We were going to deliver that, and we got it finally approved over in August. It was to put in play specialist bits of help and support that businesses had highlighted themselves as ways in which they might be able to push through the impact of COVID for themselves, particularly, but not explicitly also around that whole tourism agenda, because quite clearly those in tourism and hospitality hugely impacted as a consequence of this. So there's a separate loan facility available to those businesses, and the default there was £5,000 for businesses to be able to take advantage of it, whereas the one before was between 3 and 5, depending on the severity of which they've been impacted. So you can see on the slides, you had the Kickstart grant and you had the Boost Your Recovery, which was the wide one. So the Kickstart was for tourism, leisure, and hospitality, and Boost Your Recovery was the wider one. Yeah, sort of figure associated with it. When we were pushing this out, there were significant levels of demand for it. I think my recollection was right. It's about £3 million of potential grant was recognised. However, because we were using European funded grants and that businesses aren't always aware of the impact, what that means for them, we saw that actually the drawdown was less than the 3 million that it asked for, but we also didn't have 3 million anyway. So that's probably useful that it did. However, it did finally realise there's 371 full applications coming in for us, of which majority were approved with 306. That was worth about £1.1 million in total. Mentioned that the grants were overbid, and I think some of this is one of the learnings that we take on. Not everyone is aware how European funding works. In fact, it's defrayed in nature, so a business would have to pay up front. I think that probably put the kibosh to quite a few businesses actually taking it forward, because they obviously didn't have the cash flow to be able to fund it prior to actually drawing that down first. We're only looking at sort of delivering out small items, but it was a revenue only fund, value for money, meant also that we needed to get free quotes. And again, businesses weren't entirely used to that. Got to remember this is on a backdrop where they could just go to their local authority and get a grant without having to make much in way of kind of how they're going to spend it and mechanisms. Whereas for European funding, whilst it was really light touch and they did bend over backwards to try to make it as easy as possible, there were still some limitations on how that flexibility could be. So it did mean that some businesses were struggling to find the idea of going to get 2 or 3 quotes for something, and by the time they decided on that, it just became too much like hard work for them, and they just sort of cracked on. So as we sort of progressed it forwards, clearly we were working with the intent of it's a can-do approach. So when the business approached us, we absolutely were looking to try and get all micro granular with it and looking for ways to actually knock it out. We absolutely went with a view that we want to support them. So if there were issues, we made sure that we made them aware of it and allowed them the opportunity to sort of go back and rechange their application with some new stuff. Gone over most of this in terms of it does look like we put this totally as a web-based program as well, so people could actually apply. And I think that's helped us as a service to recognise that we can do this sort of thing. We can do it very well. It's probably not good enough to say, but it's just web-based only. We need to make sure we've got that bits as well, so that where people do have questions or issues with someone friendly at the end of the line, hence I think where the growth will come in again, just that ability just to phone a number, have a quick conversation, someone that's knowledgeable, skilled, and can help them navigate through those things. As with all these things, in hindsight, we definitely could have prepared the ground a little bit better, but we always can do better. That's just a reality of these things. Particularly with COVID, it was done at pace. Done with the, it was done with the, this is what we need to do to get the money out to businesses. But as I sort of mentioned previously, this was new to a lot of businesses and had got into this rhythm of being able to just go to their local to draw them some funding. So when we were coming back with our COVID recovery stuff, it's like, oh no, you've got lots of additional barriers in our way. So we should, next time round, or whatever the next challenge, next resilience challenge for us will be, we'll absolutely make sure we put out a lot more sort of social media and support to help enable businesses to go off and do that. You can see on the next slide, which is a take up, fairly evenly split, although there are a few where they've got very small percentages. It's hard to say why that is. Have a conversation around what we might want to do in the future to look at that. But generally speaking, it's just good to be able to get money out to those businesses. I think the reality is it's those businesses that probably already knew that there was boost around and there was support around. We know one of the challenges we've got just in terms of deliveries, but generally is that sometimes businesses don't actually focus on what local authorities or public sector are delivering. So again, it's a real opportunity to be able to remind people. Of course, that was one of the reasons that we wanted to go forward. That view that we wanted to be there for everybody. So we wanted to create a bigger fan base across that business to demonstrate that we are relevant, we do deliver good support. It's definitely worth those businesses going off and getting at least having a conversation around what the art of possible might look like in terms of what support options are available. Want local business support provision. You may or may not be aware there's a national business support helpline which is funded by government. You can see we've come in the top 10 of inquiries, which was a slight shock to us because usually when we get the stats back from the National Business Support Helpline, we're looking if we see 2 or 3 businesses that have called us. Again, I like to think that's because we're not well known around the financial business community, and that's the first call that they make. Interestingly, there's quite a good number there. It's about 50 businesses that have called into that National Business Support Helpline. Just to give you confidence, the National Business Support Line are absolutely 100% aware of Boost. They will absolutely make sure that any business that would benefit from support services that are available in Hampshire, they would make sure that that business then went off and got it. One of the challenges we've got going forward, National Business Support Helpline, is that data sharing agenda, the GDPR stuff. But that is something that we bring up on a fairly regular basis, about making sure that we can better coordinate the calls that come into the National Business Support Helpline and collect it back onto Boost so that we can understand who is calling into the National Support Helpline and hopefully sort of put in support at a quicker and pacier level than the National Business Support Helpline. They're running a couple of pilots nationally at the moment, just on that whole GDPR thing. And again, as you'd expect, our hands are right up in the air, stretching upwards, saying that we want to be part of that. And we want to make sure we've got a robust GDPR data sharing agreement in place so that we can make sure businesses are best supported. If we go on to the next slide, you can see the call data. Usually it's right down at the lower part of that because we expect our service providers to be going out and having these conversations. But you can see that during certainly the first few months of COVID, it was spiking. So lots and lots of people were calling into Boost to see what support is available. I want to have all. Andy, you're so far ahead of it. It's fantastic. As I mentioned previously, most of our support is around business to business. At that simple pie chart, you can see actually the majority of the conversations that were coming in were from B2C, business to consumer. So again, massive challenge there in terms of how we can make sure that we are relevant and helpful. And that comes back again to that conversation that I've just had with you about we want to expose every business in Lancashire to the goodness that it's boosting the growth hub, with a view that even if we can't help and support them, we don't just let them go. We make sure we give them the right, the best support we possibly can in the circumstance where the funding is being drawn down from. But more importantly, we want them to have a really great experience because they will know other businesses that would benefit this sort of activity. And a kind word is much, much easier to pass around than a less kind word about it not being particularly helpful. So everybody that's delivering business support delivers it in a proactive way, even if we can't support, make sure that they understand why we can't support and hopefully leave with a good sense of to that absolute best. Then if we move on to the local authority data, you can see that got a fairly broad range of people, sort of sectors if you like, supported. By far the biggest is a small business sort of grant in terms of inquiries, followed by just that sort of general advice, guidance. And again, you'd expect that to be coming in at a time when it's all pretty much up in the air. Hopefully businesses want to just have a sensible, sane conversation with someone outside of their organisation so they can get a good sense of what it is that they can do. So you can see in terms of, I think generally speaking, when you look at when you look back and reflect on Boost, we had lots of quick interventions for businesses. This is a time of crisis. They haven't got time for some of that forward planning. They want quick, easy wins with the activity they want to progress. They don't want to go off and do 12 hours. They don't want to come back for a workshop. They want to have a conversation, want to get to the result. And that was very clearly reflected, I think, in the sort of stats and the conversations that we were having. So you can see that, you know, in the first 6 months, we had sort of over 1,200 inquiries, and that compared to over 1,200 inquiries for the whole year. So in 6 months, we did the previous year. Similarly for web traffic, obviously we had a big sense of marketing out there, pushing that boost your, ask for help, followed by the boost your recovery sort of hashtags. They're award-winning bits of activity through our marketing supplier. But bottom line is we really wanted to make sure that any business that was seeking support could at least find us as quickly as they possibly can. And you'll see that the medium and higher interventions have sort of gone down as you would expect. And it's fair to say that that continues now as well. Businesses are still in that space where they are looking for some quicker wins and aren't quite ready yet to start getting into what we'd call support pathways through kind of doing additional hours, turning into workshops. There are still, it's worth noting, still lots of businesses that are, but still the majority of the conversations, businesses just want to have that sensible conversation, go off and do it, and then look back to us when they're ready to sort of surge forward. We're also really lucky, obviously, to have base funding coming into here as well. You can see we've got that 300k days to go off and do additional activities. Obviously, in 2021-22, we've got some increased funds from as well. That was looking at covering work, not only around COVID, but obviously at this time we also had EU exit, and government were really keen that we helped businesses understand what the ramifications of leaving the EU. It's fair to say that with some of that funding, we partnered really well with the Chambers of Commerce because they already do internationalisation absolutely brilliantly across the county. So we're able to work with the Chambers, who then just essentially opened up all their internationalisation services to all businesses across Lancashire. So it was a really good example of good partnership working. sort of moving forward. We also use some funding to do resilience activities, to help businesses think about what sort of resilience sort of methods they can put in place, and lots of master classes. We work with lots of our boosting co-partners, delivering workshops and master classes. Finally, I think the new government initiative around peer networks. We piloted it in the first year, did it absolutely brilliantly. I think we had about 32 cohorts of businesses going through that. That was in a time of crisis as well. So, you know, it does put into play that whilst lots and lots of businesses are still struggling, and we do absolutely need to recognise that, we also have lots and lots of businesses in Lancashire that want to crack on, want to go off and do things that are absolutely magnificent. And peer networks, it's one of those things which kind of just makes sense when you start to see it play. That idea of businesses supporting each other, it feels like a really nice way in which businesses can get absolutely excellent support, but also increase their networked capacity across Lancashire as well. So I think that's it for me. Thank you very much. Now we'll pass over to Amber.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I was a bit loud. My name is Amin Vipari, as Andy and Adi introduced myself, and I lead on business finance across Lancashire. So I want to talk to you about the whole journey that we undertook in Lancashire with regards to helping businesses access the right finance. But before I go into that, I just want to give you an overview of the access to finance service that Lancashire County Council currently has in play across the county. So 7 years ago, we brought in an external service called Access to Finance to come and perform a very important role, to be a conduit between businesses of all ages and stages, from startup to scale up to exit, as well as kind of working with an ocean full of funders there to provide funding options for businesses. And that's a very integral role, because to guide businesses with regards to what is the right finance option for them, but also to make them financially robust as they grow and as they kind of go across their journey, is very, very integral. So it's a service that particularly came into its own during the COVID initial pandemic period, and certainly continues to do so until now, and hopefully for the foreseeable future as well. As Andrew referred to, the Boost Business Lancashire Growth Hub is very well integrated within the Lancashire business community, and part and parcel of the success of the work that Access to Finance did was very much working in conjunction with our existing Growth Hub to ensure that support for businesses during the pandemic was coupled with Access to Finance support as well. Next slide. So in terms of COVID-19 response, various range of initiatives were taken. Everything from helping businesses understand what district and local support was available through their local authority, through grant support, especially with Lancashire having such a diverse economy, from rural, leisure, tourism, hospitality. That was very, very integral to work with 14 authorities to ensure that the right support was accessed for businesses. A great deal of the role undertaken was also signposting. Again, during this pandemic period, we were all going through a variety of both personal as well as business challenges, and to understand where the right support is, and support that was evolving week by week, day by day, was very integral. The other element of it as well was really understanding, before businesses took the decision to borrow money, were they in a position to responsibly borrow money? And this is, I appreciate, a topic which, not just during pandemic times, but is also always very, very pertinent. And with regards to that element, a lot of it was reviewing business balance sheets, cash flow forecasts, and to be fair, a lot of businesses don't have robust management accounts. So whilst annual financial accounts are available on a once-a-year basis, on a month-by-month forward planning basis, a lot of businesses didn't have that in place. And the ones that did certainly made But I would say the initial lockdown and pandemic period, a little bit more easy to navigate because they were already in control of their finances. Nonetheless, helping businesses through funding applications, reviewing their business plans, as well as where they can access cash from. It wasn't always a case of go and borrow money. Sometimes you might have money that's tied up with suppliers, for instance, or with customers that you need to chase up. Maybe you've got customers that have gone over payment day. So there's a wider, broader element that needed kind of really navigating into. But the most important aspect of the access to finance service was providing a critical friend element to it. Now, this, I would probably say, is very much, whilst it's at the bottom of the list and that it's in no specific order, is probably one not to be undermined, because our access to finance advisors, very similar to our boost advisors, are very well integrated into the Lancashire community. Their phones were ringing non-stop. I mean, I was speaking to the team 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the evening because they were fielding calls late into the evenings and weekends. You had family-run businesses that were ringing up saying, I've never borrowed money before. What do I do? Now, this kind of support might not fit into the traditional European Development Fund structure of claiming outputs, which is the mechanism to get paid. But actually, in terms of its value, is very, very significant. Next slide, please. So in terms of government-backed funding mechanisms, you might be familiar, there were two primary funding vehicles. One was the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, otherwise known as CBILS, and the other one was the Bounce Back Loan Scheme. Now, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme, starting with that first, was loans of up to 50,000, pretty much a rapid service. With regards to, I mean, you could almost argue the bounce back loan scheme was quicker than getting Amazon delivered to your house. It was that quick. You know, a lot of businesses were in a position where from the minute they applied, and that was a 5-minute application process, the money was within their bank within less than 48 hours. And that is unprecedented, that. And loans of up to 50,000, no personal guarantees involved. One of the biggest things that the government had to do was to make sure that the turnaround in lending was absolutely lightning quick, because businesses were worried, they were concerned. Whilst there were support mechanisms such as the furlough scheme, it was about keeping the head above water and making sure that the business could continue to trade. With regard to the bounce back loan scheme, the default was go to your bank, because that was where resources were aligned into. Bank personnel would move from various other functions in-house over to this specific fund to make sure they can meet the demand. In total, just in Lancashire alone, £996 million of loans were offered to businesses across Lancashire, and I'm talking small to medium-sized enterprise here. With regards to the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, a slightly more complex fund, larger sums of money, a little bit more in terms of, I would say, diligence involved because of the sums of money we're talking about, and therefore slightly lesser amounts. So we're talking 595 million of loans offered across Lancashire. With the access to finance service, combined between the two services provided support to businesses from an intense perspective of in total £5 million worth of funding over that period of time. But that doesn't account for the conversations, just signposting people, acting as a critical friend, helping with reviews of applications. This is where they provided 12 hours plus of support directly to businesses that was claimable through their project work. And as I mentioned, businesses were encouraged directly to go to their own banks. The schemes came to an end in March 2021, with repayments of many loans due to commence in spring and summer. However, you may be aware that the government introduced a pay-as-you-grow scheme, which was very much aligned to business performance and therefore gave businesses flexibility in terms of paying the loans back. Also, the loans that were offered were very, very competitive interest rates as well. Even businesses that had never borrowed before took these loans out because of the lending being on such great terms. It would have been a mistake for them not to take that out. But at the same time, and I'll come to this, it was also about responsible borrowing as well, which is another thing which is currently at the moment we're focusing on. What the government has now introduced is a recovery loan scheme. And the recovery loan scheme was originally designed to finish at the end of December this year. However, has now been extended up until the summer of 2022. Now, at the moment, we don't have the relevant information from the British Business Bank in terms of performance and figures, but certainly speaking to funders that work within that arena, take-up is very, very, very low, and that is for a number of reasons. One of being is that businesses have already borrowed quite a considerable amount of money. So either they've taken on additional or new debt. So therefore the appetite to take on further debt is therefore a challenge, which a lot of businesses look at and say, is this the right thing for me to do? Second of all, the terms aren't as good as what we had on the CBILS and bounce back loan scheme. The banks are preferring not to go down the option of the recovery loan scheme and push their own products as well. So there's a variety of reasons why, certainly from my opinion, from speaking to funders and access to finance service, why the take-up hasn't been great on this scheme so far, but we are awaiting figures which will then certainly tell us exactly where we are in terms of Lancashire. Next slide, please. The next table is just to give you a local authority breakdown really across Lancashire. So the 996 million of bounce back money and 595 million pounds worth of CBILS money, just to break down by authority level data. You'll see that there's probably no surprises in terms of representation amongst the boroughs. Generally, our business support concentration is greater within areas such as Preston and Blackburn with Darwen, and I don't think that's any different within terms of the lending figures there as well. But in total, and just to kind of give you a kind of a final picture on this element before we move on to the next slide, in total, 36 or just over 36,000 businesses, SMEs, were offered these facilities. Now we have roughly a SME base of 54,000 in Lancashire. So you can imagine best part of 40,000 out of 54 in total borrowing government-backed loan options is a significant amount of businesses accessing these facilities. Moving on to the next slide, which is talking about the challenge. So this is really where we're kind of very much in the heart of it at the moment. Businesses sought financial support for a number of reasons. It might have been to do with survival, but also the positive element as well is businesses utilize the money to pivot their business models. So certainly businesses embracing technology, digital platforms, different routes to market was absolutely integral, and borrowing money on such competitive terms allowed businesses to incorporate plans which were maybe planned for further down the line, but brought them forward because of access to capital that enabled them to do so, and also to rebuild their business as well. And there are a number of businesses that certainly we speak to on a regular basis that have utilised the money to have a more robust business in place now, which is their focus on creating wealth and jobs for the county. However, most of the funding solutions delivered by through government have involved businesses taking on new additional debt, and now that is a big challenge that we have to work on, because debt isn't a bad thing as long as it's managed. And with a lot of businesses, we have seen an upturn in revenue, so therefore the ability to pay back the loans has not been a problem at all. But nonetheless, it is something we need to closely manage, closely monitor, work with businesses through our growth hub of Boost Business Lancashire to work with these businesses to be more resilient, to be more stronger, to look at opportunities where we can trade abroad, where we can make sure our businesses are sustainable as well. So all this is part and parcel of the challenge, but a very positive challenge as well. Moving on to the next slide, which is talking about the solutions. And this is where our access to finance team really have come into play and where we're going to work more closely with them. So whilst at the moment, I would say, certainly when we look at funding, we break it down into two options. We break it down into debt funding and equity funding. Debt funding, in the more simplest terms, is borrowing money and paying it back over a period of time. With equity funding, slightly different. We may see a more glamorous version of it on TV with Dragon's Den. However, the reality is very different. And with equity funding, it's where businesses access capital, but for a stake of the business, but bring expertise into the business to help them grow as well. Now, if you ask most businesses, what is the one thing you've really valued during this period of time, apart from the money, it's the access to experts, people who they can bounce ideas off, use as a sounding board and help give them guidance. that is where equity funding comes in. And there is a range of equity funding, from early stage equity for your startup, smaller businesses, right through to your VCs, venture capitalists for more established businesses and larger borrowing. And then you've also got angel investors as well. And we have 2 angel investor networks set up in Lancashire, one in central Lancashire and one North Lancashire, which is there made of local investors wanting to work with SMEs to help provide them with the capital and the expertise to grow their business. Now, the challenge as well as the solution, which is really important here, is there is a lack of awareness generally of equity options. When you look at equity traditionally, equity has been mainly used between what is known in the funding world as the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London. In recent years, Manchester has very much broken that triangle. But again, equity ecosystems are not built overnight. It is something that we need to invest in to be able to not only raise awareness, educate businesses, help them come over and I guess get over the obstacles of, well, what if I have to give up decision making within my business? What if someone comes in and takes a large chunk of my business and I have no control over it? The reality of it is the business is in control. However, through our access to finance service and other services we have, it's very important that we help businesses prepare for that as well. And there's various other elements as well. The equity route also provides businesses with a great deal of stability because you're literally going through a belts and braces approach of making your entire business more robust, more stronger, more resilient. So even if businesses don't go down the route of actually taking up an offer, it actually strengthens their business regardless in the process anyway. And the team have created a program under our existing support, which we have, where we are working with businesses on pitch presentations, developing their pitch decks, helping them write business plans and more updated business plans, financial forecasting, valuations. Now, this is a big thing because most businesses will think their business is valued 10 times more than the reality of what it is. And I guess that's part and parcel of managing expectations as well. And working on term sheets and investor negotiations. Again, each party, whether it's the buyer or the seller, however we want to look at it, what's the best deal possible? And the access to finance team is there to act as an impartial conduit to make sure that the businesses get the best possible deal. Next slide, please, Andy. So in terms of the future of funding, while certainly kind of, we are embraced for a lot of change, funding is going to, certainly from work I do with the British Business Bank and several other funding houses, it will dramatically change. I don't think we're going to see an upturn in debt funding purely because of levels of funding and loan products that businesses have already drawn down. These sit on the balance sheets, and generally a lot of businesses will not want to take on further lending. The more lending you take on, the more you've got to pay back. I guess in personal circumstances, people have mortgages, business loans, etc. The more you borrow, the more you take on, the more you're paying out on a monthly basis. That puts a great deal of pressure on the business to ensure their revenue is consistent, but also growing at the same time as well. So at the moment, and certainly looking at where it is, debt funding is not in demand. Who knows where it's going to go in 2022, but certainly at the moment, looking at the figures, hard to say. But what it means is there's other funding options that come in. Asset-based lending is at the moment a very popular choice where businesses are able to borrow money through assets that they have and help those assets work for them in the business, particularly popular in manufacturing and engineering businesses. And again, there's a range of specialist asset-based lenders in Lancashire, which our access to finance team works with. Innovative new lending products available. So again, markets are changing. Various different institutions and organizations are bringing out more innovative products. Again, the role of the access to finance service is to make sure that we're constantly up to date with what funds are available and helping businesses understand these better. Fintech solutions, again, as the tech platforms move greater and greater, it's understanding key markets, emerging markets, and where government priorities are, where wealth and job creation sits to help businesses to do that. But also, and finally, more importantly, startup businesses. Lancashire is a hotbed for helping startups. Startups, unless they're sitting on big cash reserves, it's very difficult to finance your business model and business proposition without access to capital. The biggest challenge that startups have is ability to convince lenders to borrow money, because quite often, yes, we are aware not all startups survive, but again, it's part of the future of where we need to invest our time and effort in and work with our emerging startups who are going to be the future wealth and job creators to really help them do that. Next slide, please, Andy. So finally, and just to reiterate the continued role of access to finance, the team in Lancashire will continue to work with the Growth Hub. We'll continue to raise awareness of funding options. We'll also help business owners who can often be very time poor. And certainly feedback I get back from the team is that the worst thing that they find, or the worst part of the job, is chasing up businesses for funding applications. But that's something that they'll continue to work flexibly with businesses and ensure that the service that we provide, part funded through Lancashire County Council, continues to be a mainstay and continues to add value to businesses in Lancashire. Thank you.
Just to wrap up in terms of some broader strands of activity during the COVID period, and then to just share a few statistics on where we think the economy is moving, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. So important also to recognise the response of the business community itself. We had significant effort on the national calls around supply of PPE, hand sanitisers and ventilators, and that was actually Lancashire companies fabricating those ventilators. A lot of work done by Health Innovation Campus at Lancaster, bringing some of that work together, but also the North and West Lancashire Chamber of Commerce, and a manufacturing cluster in East Lancashire who worked around the mobilisation to actually create and fabricate ventilators from the blueprints that were developed nationally. Chamber Helpline also played an important role. They received, in parallel with the Growth Hub, national funding to enable their own call centre. Very similar areas of work, but also accreditation of businesses in some respects for the recording of furlough, and also the key businesses and key workers were genuine in terms of their access to put children into schools and educational settings to allow people to work. Just in terms of the work that the Skills Hub, Skills and Employment Hub team who work alongside us in economic development did. I guess there were a couple of phases really. The early part of COVID, we were looking at firms who were unable to place staff on furlough and went straight to a redundancy situation. So very much looking where we could retain those skills within the economy through skills swaps. But also looking around creating a sort of skills for work package, which enabled people both made redundant and those who were still on furlough or at risk of redundancy to start to retrain and gain skills for alternative roles. It's also worth saying, and you'll see this from some of the slides that follow, that we've considerably bolstered our labour market intelligence capabilities through this period, and now got a far stronger hold, which isn't something we hold to ourselves. It's something we very much share with training and skills providers to allow them also to vary their curriculum and respond to the needs of the business community and the data as we see it coming forward. Worked very much hand in hand with the Department for Work and Pensions and the National Careers Service where there were redundancies taking place. As has already been said, the Lancashire economy is dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. Almost 95% of the business base employ less than 10 people. And so we quite often don't see notified redundancies. Department of Work and Pension gets a formal notification where over 50 people are at risk, but we weren't seeing that. It was more about people coming forward who really didn't want to lose staff and were looking for the best possible solutions and best possible soft landing for those staff if they did have to lose them. Post 16, officer group formed around that, and very much recognising at that point, the difficulties of young people to actually enter the world of work and that potential for a lost generation as those opportunities were in abeyance, with companies not taking people on. And to respond to Amin and Andrew's point about businesses who took the opportunity and business who pivoted, we've done a lot around digital skills training, particularly in the retail sector where people may have had a website but didn't use it as their primary channel of trading, and have had to do that moving forward. Sector skills work academies are where there are significant opportunities taking place, and how we sort of train and align people to move into those opportunities with guaranteed interviews, for example, at the end of the process. As we said, the sort of pivot to virtual has seen a lot of learning move online, and that has included the services that we offer around careers and around sort of inspiration in terms of accessing live examples of the world of work. Clearly, schools were unable to undertake business visits. Young people were unable to take work experience, but we've tried as far as possible to make that a real experience online. And this has helped us really pull together the sort of compendium of opportunity that there is around digital skills, and pull together that offer in a more coherent way within Lancashire. So finally, and just to summarise, as we've seen, furlough has been a key instrument for the local business community through this period, allowing them to offset the cost of staff while still retaining a commitment to those staff. And as you can see, probably better in your handouts than you can on the screen, this slide illustrates the level of furlough that's taken place across Lancashire, district by district, and how those levels have changed as we've moved forward through the crisis. Just looking at where, in terms of age profile, people have been furloughed, and it has very much been to the sort of back end of their careers, 40 plus for men, and also women. That 25 to 29, I guess, is probably the biggest proportional difference in terms of female to male, but potentially reflects some of the careers and sectors that those people are working in. And again, quite a complex slide, but looking at furlough by age, with by and large the sort of lighter lines being the older age groups and the darker being the younger. Again, probably it's hard to read on the screen, but better in the handouts, furlough by sector. So we can see other services as the main sector. Arts, entertainment, obviously heavily hit, and accommodation and food services. So broadly speaking, as we've had those responses which were specifically aimed at retail, service sector, hospitality and the visitor economy, that is broadly speaking where the hardest hit has been taken in terms of the local economy. I guess more gratifying to note is that whilst the claimant count in Lancashire did obviously spike in the spring of 2020, that has levelled off, and more latterly we've started to see that decline. So the Lancashire line there is the dark blue line, which I think sort of mirrors the Northwest and Greater Manchester trends. Sorry, that's Northwest trends. Yeah, Great Britain and Northwest trends. Again, looking at the distribution of the claimant count across the local authorities and where the Lancashire average is, broadly speaking, that distribution has not changed significantly with the impact of COVID, but a significant focus in the two unitary authorities, Burnley the Highburn and Pendle. Preston slightly above the Lancashire average. Further data on claimant count by gender, which I will leave for the moment. And again, the split by age, where you can clearly see it's that 18 to 24-year-old group who've borne the brunt of the increasing claimant count through this period. Some quick data on the self-employed income support scheme. Again, this was a nationally run program, but something that we were clearly aware of and was heavily drawn on in terms of the range of offer, the national business support offer in its totality. And that slide gives you the total value of claims made in those dark blue bars and the average by claimant. So looking at somewhere in the region of sort of 8,000 to 9,000 pounds, broadly speaking, and the highest values largely being in those areas with the highest populations, although it's interesting that sort of Lancaster figures more heavily as an economy that's probably more dependent on freelancers. And again, that analysis by sector. Again, those sort of probably notable to pick out things like arts, entertainment, and recreation, 29%, construction, 28%, education, 28%. In terms of self-employed people who've taken benefits this service. Other services 31% and transportation and storage 35%, which I guess which is highly seasonal, we'd expect to see to have decreased more recently. So that's us. Hopefully that's given you a useful canter through the range of business support that was on offer both nationally and locally. And how we've tried to make sure that local businesses and individuals have been able to access that offer, and businesses continue to trade and continue to pivot through the period. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope colleagues will agree that we've clearly got a knowledgeable, skilled, experienced team. I'd like to thank all three for their presentation today. Hopefully, I made a few notes as we went through it, and hopefully you'll agree that the service has been flexible, very committed, responsive, very interested in partnership working. That's how we do things across Lancashire. Also, a great deal of reflection of lessons learned, then starting to think as where we started, that we're not at the end of the pandemic, but we're coming out of it. So we're looking to the future, what our improved offers will be, how we make them more relevant for interventions, for investments. You know, I think that reflects really well on the work that the whole team has done, and I really would like if the committee and their recommendations would come, would make a note to commend the team for the work over the last 18 months. And open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regards to the report on Boost Lancashire, you mentioned the European Regional Development Funding, and being a newly elected councillor from Highburn, I just was intrigued why ours funding allocated or funding received in Highburn was 1%. I think it was around 17 million. In Burnley, which is obviously a neighbouring borough in East Lancashire, was 40 million, and Pendle was in the mid-80s. I was just intrigued why the disparity. Then in regards to the access to, I've got 3 questions. I might as well just say more. Access to finance. You talk about the Angel Network, and you mentioned one in North Lancashire and West Lancashire. Again, I'm intrigued. East Lancashire wasn't mentioned. And again, what the potential reasons are for that. Then the bounce back loan. I noticed the National Audit Office did an initial report last year, and they cited with given the quick rollout of the scheme that around 54% of the loans were potentially never going to be repaid due to a number of factors. Do you have any idea what the current default rate is in Rhinebeck? And also, this is probably a greater question. There was access to these loans via dormant companies. So literally, if you had lots of dormant companies, suddenly they were drawing down the £50,000 when they've never traded. But also, a single director could potentially have access to that bounce back loan by the different companies, and what the challenges that present, whether that was again certain individuals taking this opportunity to obviously take advantage of these low rates and potentially never paying them back. And if there was going to be a review, what you would obviously offer as insight. Them are my questions. Thank you very much.
Chair, if you're okay. I'll take the first of those questions and then I'll lob the hand grenade over to Amin. I think in terms of take up in Hyndburn, we've consistently noticed that Boost has had a slightly lower level of awareness and take up in Hyndburn than other areas. So that may be one of the constituent reasons that the loan fund, the grant fund, the COVID grant fund that we offered through Boost had less take up in that area. I guess it's also fair to offset that against what the district council itself did. District council in Hyndburn was very active, very quick, and took quite a risky attitude to getting rid of its own grant for business. In that, the applications were dealt with very quickly, turned around, and I think that got a reputation amongst the Hyndburn business community that that was the easiest and quickest route to access if you were looking for COVID grant. And I think in some ways the county council scheme that we were operating suffered in comparison to that. Nevertheless, I'd hand on heart say we were minded of the issues that you raised about bounce back loans, and we're very keen that we didn't give grants to entities that were in any way dubious. And we did have occasions on which grants that we'd rejected, the businesses were raided the following week on the basis of false applications that they'd made. So I think there's always that balance between getting these funds out quickly because businesses are genuinely in distress, and making sure that we've fully checked the credentials of the business to make sure that we are backing a proper entity. Amin, do you want to take the business finance ones?
Great. So I'm going to try and answer all the questions. If there's anything I don't cover, please do remind me. So I'm going to go in order of how you've the questions that you've asked. So first of all, regarding the angel investor networks, how angel investor networks traditionally tend to work is you have investor networks within a 1 hour radius in terms of travel wise for investors. So what we found was having central Lancashire gave us pretty much good proximity across the county. But going all the way to North Lancashire, where we've got Lancaster, Morecambe, Bay Area, kind of almost bordering on Cumbria, where there's a lot of high net worth individuals, it made sense to have one there. Part of our plans for 2022, funny enough, is actually to introduce a East Lancashire Angel Investor Network. So as it stands right now, we're working with the Access to Finance Service, whose current contract finishes at the end of this calendar year, and the new contract starts in January with the last remaining tranche of European Development Funds, which takes up until the summer of 2023. And part of that contract that we're currently developing at the moment will be more of a focus on angel investor networks, which looks at local investors, but also developing a third network, and that being East Lancashire. So certainly within the next few months, we'll have a further development on that. The angel investor networks will exceed the time frame for European funds very much. Once they're set up, they become completely unrelated. It's just the actual resource time that's taken up to do that. So certainly with regards to East Lancashire, what I would say is watch this space. We've got something in the pipeline and it is going to be happening and very much working along that kind of East Lancashire M65 corridor belt. With regards to default rates and I guess payback of loans. There's a couple of things really here with the pay as you grow scheme. I guess it's very hard to gauge at the moment what those rates are, because what certainly I found as once kind of lockdown restrictions enabled us to do so and going out to see businesses, there's a lot of businesses that I would say are sitting on that money and actually making a decision of either paying it back or keeping it to utilize for growth purposes. Now, completely appreciate and take on board the kind of figures that have been touted. As it stands at the moment, we do rely on the British Business Bank for our intelligence with regards to this, and they rely on the banking institutions and the funders to give them that. The way that the CBILS and bounce back loans are set up is, whilst the liability has been offset to the lender and the borrower, there are specific terms between the British Business Bank government and the funders. So we're talking banks and alternative lenders, that whilst the investment is protected, so in a typical scenario, say we use the example of Barclays. Barclays will have terms set in place where whilst they are not liable, and if a business doesn't pay the loan back, whilst its liability doesn't sit on them, they have to go through a very robust process of pursuing that debt and evidencing to say this is what we have done and what we have tried. And certainly with institutions of that nature, there will be people and resources in place. And from what I'm aware as well is that there will be a team of people that the government will deploy who will basically work as not, I wouldn't say debt collectors, but people that will pursue that debt. I absolutely appreciate that where we've got businesses that are now dormant, closed down, you know, the kind of trail there to chase up and follow up is going to be very bleak. And I think, you know, certainly taking on board the element of individuals taking advantage, you know, it is something that has been, you know, certainly spoken about. And I think in any kind of scenario, whether it's furlough or whatever it may be in any walk of life, there will always be individuals who will potentially take advantage. What I would like to think certainly is when you look at the level of funding, and certainly within the CBILS territory, the larger, the more growing, the more scaling businesses that have taken that borrowing on have utilised it to further invest in infrastructure, growth, jobs, locality, remaining within Lancashire as well. So there's a lot of positives as well. Absolutely share your concerns. But like I said, at the moment, we don't have the up-to-date data from the British Business Bank, purely because the pay-as-you-grow scheme, as well as other things, will probably manifest itself more in 2022 than it will do as we stand right now.
Thank you. Questions and answers, please. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to bring up this point that we know that the local authorities such as Wire and everything were very good with the businesses in the area. But I think a lot of businesses didn't know about this Boost Lancashire or the help of the Lancashire bit support. And in the future, I think we should actually make it known, and I think there should be more details of how you can actually contact the business support for Lancashire, because I don't see anything where it's very easy to get hold of the information, contact details, so businesses can actually contact you directly. Because a lot of businesses don't actually just, especially with this COVID situation, we're totally relying on the local authority, which in our case was Wire, to deal with the matter, not knowing that there was this other support which was available from Lancashire. Thank you.
I can just answer first, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, a lot of the guys answer from a service perspective, but one thing we're doing is for a member's perspective, is we've got a bite-sized briefing scheduled, I think, early in the new year, which is going to go through now, coming out at this stage, to go through all the support we offer, how members find out about that, how they can access it. So when, if a situation does occur, just in a situation like this, or just an ongoing business inquiry, they know directly how to pass that straight on. So that's something we're doing. Already.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the figures speak for themselves really about whether businesses were aware of Boost and, you know, some of the offers that the County Council has. Just looking on the C-bills and BBLS that was offered, you gave some figures on that, and you said that the figures showed 36,000 SMEs actually made contact. Does that mean that none of the SMEs got a bounce back loan and the first loan? They only had one or the other, and also 36 out of 54. I think it's a good percentage. But what kind of support would the others get? Did you have contact with other SMEs that didn't actually require a loan but needed advice?
Yes, so in terms of the figures there, they were figures provided of loans offered. Now, very few didn't take up the offer, but that was a minimal percentage. But that's how it's very much kind of conveyed. In terms of, yes, you're right. The idea was that if you had a Beebles, you couldn't take a C-bills loan. However, there was a period where you could upgrade, if that's the right word to say. So if you're a business that took a bounce back loan and 50,000 at one point wasn't enough, you would basically speak to your existing funder that you got that loan from, and you would move then to a C-bills scheme rather than both. So what you don't have within those figures is duplication. People either sit in one camp or the other. So the 36,000 is 36,000 individual. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And with regards to support, what's kind of, whilst numbers there are of businesses being offered, there was a lot of conversations and a lot of sense checking where people would just make contact with our support services and say, I'm not sure if I need to borrow money or not. What do you think? And that's where the access to finance service comes onto its own, because it's impartial. It's not aligned with any specific fund. There's no targets to say you have to make sure X amount goes out the door. It's making the right decisions for the businesses. And there were cases where businesses found actually it's a better way for me to access money or show more resilience rather than add debt to my balance sheet. So yes, that support, and it's still ongoing as well with the recovery loan scheme, where we're guiding businesses on saying borrowing or accessing money isn't just as straightforward as taking a loan. There might be certain efficiencies that you can incorporate into your business. There's other ways that you can release funds and capital, and that's something that's an ongoing area that we're working with businesses on and continuing to do so.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, so to begin with, I wanted to sort of come back to what Councillor Clark had said, and very much I agree that I was under the impression that business support was really coming through via the District Council and Wire again, and it's almost very interesting to find after the event that the County Council did put together support, but seemingly didn't get the message out. So I'm pleased with what Councillor Riggett has to say, that there is a bite-sized briefing coming, but really that bite-sized briefing is a year and a half too late. And that may be indicative of the fact that councillors were, I think, somewhat ignored during the early stages of the pandemic, and perhaps we could have had a role in getting the word out and could have contributed a little bit more. But certainly, you know, I suppose it will be interesting to have that briefing, and I welcome the fact that that's coming. I wanted to also talk about the Development Fund COVID European Regional Development Fund COVID-19 grants and the pie chart that we have. I'm interested really in the fact there is a very large disparity between different districts, and I wondered whether there was less take up and less support for rural businesses. Just because very superficially looking at it, perhaps the percentages for some of the more rural districts were lower, but equally that might be quite reasonable. I mean, you would expect perhaps a different distribution of businesses in different districts. There may be different needs, there may have been different support available, but I really wanted a comment from the officers of whether they've looked at that, whether it was clear that there was support available for rural businesses as well.
Just to come on that, come back on that last point very quickly. We were fortunate in that the grants fund that we had to administer was actually run by our rural grants program team. So there was a very strong presence of rural businesses in there. They won't appear as high figures for predominantly rural districts just because of the scale of the business population in those areas. But we can produce the figures by sector, and rural did well out of it.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd just like to say that as all of us here, all Lancashire County Council should be very proud of the achievements of Lancashire County Council. A lot of businesses in my area, a lot of rural businesses, a lot of young people that are just set up in business had great help from the County Council. I beg to differ, it was well advertised, people did know about it, people did know what was happening. And as a County Councillor, obviously, I supported them and told them it was available. I think that's a duty we all do. But on behalf of all the businesses you've supported in my area, I would like to thank you all. I'd like to thank the business support team. It was an excellent effort, and it's nice to see that Lancashire was one of the leading councils in the country for supporting business. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've been aware of the Boost programme and the way that the County Council does for a long time. I'm the cabinet member for finance at South Ribble, so I'm also aware of the huge amount of money that's gone through the districts, but I see them as two separate complementary streams of work, really. So yes, all district councils have had a lot of money and they've got it out as quickly as possible. My question is, what have we learned from this? Because we've had an awful lot of money come into the county that's had to be dealt with, some of it very quickly and some of it on a more strategic base. So thinking about access to finance, thinking about what's going to be happening. I was always confident that business would bounce back from COVID because it was a short shock, if you want to use a cliche, but the capacity was still there. So things like furlough were brilliant, absolutely brilliant, these schemes, and we should acknowledge that. But there's a great opportunity coming in, certainly in my part of Lancashire. If I think about GCHQ2, if we can call it that, it's secret, so I don't know what we're about to call it. But there's an enormous opportunity, and if we've learned anything about how we work with our district colleagues, access to finance, promoting SMEs, I'd just be interested to know, are we any wiser about how we work with district colleagues now before COVID? Thanks.
Just a few words on that. I think some of the things that slowed us down were in terms of having to go out where we needed to procure things. So they're always issues, but I think we circumnavigated those quite quickly. We established, as was said in the presentation, a process around the grants that we ran that was wholly online. So we didn't need the famous wet signatures that we previously did. I think with the level of integration, I mean, you're absolutely right. The level of grants that went out through the districts was probably 10 or 15 times in excess of the grant program that we had. But that was very much driven by their own finance departments and their own business rates registers, and something around integrating that knowledge of businesses through business rates with our knowledge of businesses through the sectors they operate in is something I think that could really bear fruit and dividends for us in the future. And you're absolutely right. We've seen a number of upticks in terms of some really positive investments coming into the county more recently. And in fact, you know, the issue that we're really grappling with at the moment is the difficulties in finding the right skilled staff for the demand that's out there at the moment.
I just answer part of what you've mentioned there as well. Part of our access to finance team and what I work with them on a monthly and quarterly basis is looking at district level data of businesses and authorities that they engage with and the work that they do. So part of what we task our access to finance team with is regular events, regular meetings with district staff, as well as figures to represent what work they've done in each district as well. And that's something even pre-COVID and even going forward we'll continue to manage.
Can I just add 1 minute? You're so gracious, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody for the comments and to add to what Andy just said there. It's from a member perspective. I'm sure members will be aware that there's a lot of discussions ongoing about the future of Lancashire, where we're going in a number of areas around the county deal, and we're building on all the goodwill and partnership where that happened during the COVID recovery, and members are speaking to each other a lot more across organisations, and I think that's the direction of travel we want to continue, so we can build on this, whether it's economic development or any other service area.
And also for the support that has been given to business in Lancashire. And I think the real test will be is how the economy, how Lancashire prospers after all this support. And I believe so far the news is quite good that's coming through, that you know, we're achieving employment in Lancashire and we are prospering. So that's good news. Thank you for your support during the pandemic, which continues, of course. I would just ask members to note the support provided to businesses in Lancashire during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Now, I hate these meetings to be rushed, and very often I think that we should only have one main item, but we actually have two main items because we've now got item 6, which is the Lancashire Strategic Assessment 2022 to 2025. And we've got new officers coming in who are Pete, you're going to introduce them. Brilliant. Because there's 4 and I've only got 3 on my list.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing this agenda item to come in. It's the Lancashire Strategic Assessment 2022-25. The summary explains exactly what this is about. It is a key part of the work to produce the Community Safety Agreement. And I'm with us this morning and presenting most of the presentation is Lee Sculfer, who is the Senior Partnership Analyst for Lancashire Constabulary. He's seconded to the County Council for this piece of work. We've also got Debbie Thompson, the Public Health Specialist, and Alison Wilkins, who's the Senior Public Health Practitioner, and they both work in the Health, Equity and Welfare Partnerships Department. And we're also joined by Steph Hall, who's the Crime, Reoffending and Criminal Justice Officer who works for the OPCC, the Office for Police and Crime Commissioner. So I'll hand over to Lee, who is going to do most of the speaking. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the invite respect to the strategic assessment. I'll give you a brief overview of the process that's been undertaken, what the key themes have been identified across the county. It is a Plan Lancashire document. It is an overview. It's not too specific to individual areas, issues. Part of the process is to provide the assessment itself and then to provide 40 local profiles for each of the areas across the county. This then assists with the community safety agreement and the local action plans moving forward. It's the local action plans that go into the actual detail of what needs to be done within each of the communities. So the purpose of the assessment is to highlight significant crime, antisocial behaviour threats, issues, the impacts upon community safety. Like I say, the actual assessment is not an exhaustive account of all threats and issues across the county, nor is it intended to be a performance document. Respect. The process that we've undertaken this year is similar to what we've done in previous years. It is a 3-year cycle. So we've reviewed the previous assessments from 2018. We've gathered information from local strategies and local assessments. There are the Pan Lancashire boards in respect of, for example, the thematic boards in respect of reoffending, etc. So we've got the information from there as well, and also a consultation with so the consultation with the partners, we have 3 events in June, whereby to attend the community safety partnerships across the county, to put forward. We have good discussions around. I'll just go into the feedback as I go through this presentation too. 2 called tools to identify issues and threats. 1 being morale assessment tool, stands for the management of risk and law enforcement. This is a reference. This is used to look at risks and threats and considers the mitigation and the organisation positions for each. So basically, they have the resources to deal with them. Also use the crime severity tool. So what the severity tool is, it gives a weighting for particular crime types. So for example, consider a criminal damage to have a weighting of, so serious assault, we have a weighting of 5. That's just to show it consider severity. That's based on sentencing data. Public engagement. Use the in the know system that the council use, the police and fire service, as an additional arm of the in the know tool is the Lancashire Talking say survey system, if you will, community system, identifies the top issues within the community. Also use the training standards young person survey, which looks at attitudes towards alcohol, smoking. The Violence Reduction Network, they commission separate pieces of work to understand local perceptions of violence across the county. So within the document itself, key themes, if you will, key topics around vulnerability in victims, so domestic abuse, exploitation, both child and adult, hate crime, reoffending, public safety linked to crime, antisocial behaviour, violence, serious organised crime, safety. So when we have the partners gathering, shall we say, topics that we discussed at those events, they were very similar to what came back from the results from the Lancashire Talk. Residence issues, antisocial behaviour, serious organised crime in respect of drug issues, communities, vulnerabilities of children, the exploitation of them, violent crime, burglary, road safety, that's a key issue from a public perspective, both around speeding issues, health issues raised, impacts on people's lives, and other issues such as the lack of what's considered a lack of inclusion in the local communities. So when we pull all that together, the key risks, if you will, threats impacting across the county itself. What were they? They came out to be domestic abuse, violence, exploitation, as I mentioned, both criminal and sexual exploitation, serious organised crime, safety. One thing we're looking into these days as well around community safety, not just the criminal elements of things, but also the health impacts, and then the causes of the causes, and then the residents and how it affects them. So, for example, these can come under a number of headings with many factors to be considered: alcohol, drugs, child poverty, unemployment, education, employment, training. So the parents, the families, and the communities themselves. When we look at some of the, shall I say, themes moving forward, obviously we've been pandemic now for 2 years, and obviously we'll need to look at pieces of work on how the pandemic has changed, shall we say, criminality in local communities across the county. Initially, levels of recorded crime did reduce, people under lockdown measures, and so on. These volumes of the crimes now starting to increase again to pre-pandemic levels. So it will take some further research from the likes of the community safety partnerships, etc., to understand what impact it's had on communities themselves. Look at the work of the Violence Reduction Network. The National Serious Violence Strategy placed an emphasis on partnership working across a number of sectors, including law enforcement, education, health, social services, housing, services and victim services. The focus is drawn to the role of the communities in the prevention of violent crime. Also, their involvement in supporting those at risk to engage in positive activities. Within the assessment, there are some key headlines around victims and offenders now, of females and male, both offender and victims, to maybe to consider moving forward. The Serious Organised Crime Strategy from this year, was introduced this year, that places an emphasis on the 4 P's approach around prevent, pursue, protect, prepare. The majority of known serious organised crime issues across the county are typically drug related and also violence associated activity. I mentioned road safety as being one of the major public concerns. What the road safety priorities will be moving forward, they'll look at those who are disproportionately affected in respect of collisions. They include cyclists, motorcyclists, people, so young road users aged between 17 and 24. That will involve a lot of education to improve safety across Lancashire. So, recommendations of the assessments for further work is necessary to understand impacts on the communities around the likes of domestic abuse, exploitation, vulnerability and safeguarding, and potentially the likes of cybercrime as well, as that's becoming more and more prominent within our local communities as well. Secondly, the community safety agreement. The key themes within the assessment are to feature within the agreement, and again, just mentioned there, include vulnerability, victims, justice, public safety, and organised crime. Also, the assessment and the local profiles are to be used as evidence to support commissioning and targeting of issues across the county. They're to support the local delivery of the partnership plan, setting of priorities over the next few years. And that's where you get your specifics around the actual themes themselves. So when we're talking about violence, that's where we're looking against women, etc. So specific. that's a brief presentation, so. Questions?
Thank you, Chairman. I found this quite an interesting document. And I just wondered how your partnership is going with the Lancashire and Cumbria Magistrates Court. Because of course they have not been able to handle as many cases in the last 18 months for obvious reasons. And yet, as far as Joe Public are concerned, they think they've got away with it. And of course, show off accordingly. Now, I have to say one of the pluses perhaps will be that we are going to have an increase in police numbers that will be coming back into our areas, which perhaps will give a more confidential footing on this. But I have to say that as interesting a report as it is, and I didn't see many great changes, which is something that we've been trying to follow for a great number of years. Prevent integration. I come from a borough where we used to have a centre which looked after domestic abuse and particularly within families, which was absorbed back into Lancashire. That one of your officers was involved at that time and was aware of it. But we still have very grave problems on this because these people who find themselves in difficulty don't have a local contact. Preston is useless as far as they're concerned. We don't have any direct services with Preston. You're trying to use public transport, whatever. So I just put one or two things that are thrown into the hat when I'm going round as an individual and things being raised, you know, with me. What are we doing about it? How can we sort of make youngsters? I note, in fairness, one, we might, as Lancashire County Council, we might be responsible. And that was with regard to youth clubs. Enhancing, we don't have as much going on in our youth clubs. We've had to review the budgets on that side, which also are centres where you get quite a lot of information of what's going on within the youth. They don't all belong to church youth clubs or anything of that nature. And again, sadly, because of the last 18 months, we have lost some of those activities and also the personnel connected with them. And I just hope that we can build on certain partnerships. I was very interested to read and hear last week that we had seen an increase in membership of people joining the Army Cadets because they could see more activities going on and wanting to learn how they can survive. We also have a very great weakness with young persons who have been in the care of local authorities, not just Lancashire, but others who have come into this area to live and then find themselves at 16 falling into the neat character. Some want to go back from whence they came. That's not always practical because we have to work with the criminal justice system within that. But where do they go in the meantime? Because they find themselves perhaps without a home. And these are concerning. So I just asked with a bit of reference I would have liked perhaps more discussion on it, but I just slightly concerned that at the moment, younger people are feeling at a loss. We're just getting back into discussing careers and futures within our schools, within class 9, 10 and 11, you know, but they've missed that. So we have got that gap, you know, and when we sort of see that there is still violence against young people, and sometimes between themselves, which is even worse. And I just hope that we can make some great strides in the next 12 months. But thank you very much for this. But I am concerned. Alcohol, drugs, big problem, young suicide. You know, we've had some incidents in my own area, and I'm sure others have too. But thank you very much for the report, Chairman. Not happy, But then that's just me. You couldn't expect it to be anyway, Chairman, would you?
Well, County Councillor Cheetham, you threw a lot of things there into the mix. I'm not entirely sure at the end what the actual question was, rather than you making some observations and giving us some information that we should take away and consider while we're drawing up our more detailed plans. Would that be fair, or was there some? Yes.
One of the things is that we haven't got, if we have some young people who are in very grave difficulties for one reason or another, which come through the courts, we have to send them outside the county. That is a killer for breaking up certain families. We did that some time ago. We've never replaced it, but I never see the point in sending them somewhere to like Derbyshire where we haven't even got a direct line. So I just think we must be more considerate in trying to help, but not throwing them away in the trash. Because that's sometimes how they feel.
So we've noted a lot of those points and we'll take them away. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to attention to page 30 and 31 around CSE and detailed information in there. The one thing that seems missing is what's going to be done in terms of raising awareness actually with the children at secondary school level and primary school level around what CSE is. I know there's a lot of voluntary organisations out there doing some sterling work, but I believe more resources need to be put in groups. I chair a group called Against Sexual Exploitation in East Lancashire, and so there's of the group to us. Some things are quite sinister, and we pass them on. It's about education and raising awareness. Sounds, I think, I'd really like to see something in there. And crime, again, it's a broad topic. However, one of our colleagues, County Councillor Jean Barnes, Mara Barnes, raised this at last full council motion around misogyny, but also towards women. And again, work needs to be done. And there's a really good work being done by the Now Streets campaign around working with schools and young people, raising awareness. And I think these plans are good, comprehensive, but with those plans needs to be resources, and that's targeted not just at the usual organisations who have the capacity to put together fantastic bids, but also smaller grassroots-based organisations who probably do a lot of effective work to parents and young people and women perspective to spoke about. So I'd like to see something back which does that and actually puts resources against it, so we know what we're getting.
So County Councillor Ali, yeah, we'll take a note of that, but there's always more that we can do. On the subject of some of that, we were able to get some funding and working with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. We've now been able to put some work into schools, healthy relationship programme. It's been rolled out to all secondary schools from the 1st of November. And it's being delivered by local specialist organisations. And I'm just reading so I don't miss anything. It covers topics such as consent, misogyny, sexual harassment, stalking, digital online abuse, and includes train the trainer workshops to upskill staff to broach difficult subjects with young men and boys on attitudinal beliefs, sexism, male privilege, sexual harassment, etc. And it works with young people who are demonstrating harmful and aggressive behaviours. There's always more we can do. But where we get the opportunity, how we can strengthen that activity based on our evidence base and work we do with our partners.
Chair, if we just come back, could you please share the contents of that and how it's been rolled out to members of the external scrutiny outside of this meeting?
I just wanted to thank our speakers for the assessment. I agree with the recommendations in it. The document itself is used for the Silent Works Commission services. It does that. So I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I do commend you on the report, but there's a few things I'd like to bring up on this. I'm very concerned about alcohol and the drug situation, especially in the area where I am. A lot of the people in the area know exactly where you can get the drugs from. There's places in where you can just actually make a phone call and they actually deliver quicker than your pizza delivery. So you can have your drugs delivered. The police do know about this because they have been informed of other occasions. And another one I'm very concerned about are these websites now where youths can go on and just get a driving license within 2 days to pay £25. I can actually show you the websites on my iPad. You can go on it now and within 10 minutes you've actually put all the details in. You've got false ID. And these false IDs have been used by the youth at 15, 16-year-olds. Then they're going around the nightclubs and everything. Then that's when they get drunk, cause problems. You get your violence, your drunkenness. And also these youths are putting themselves in danger, especially now if you're looking what's going on in Blackpool, where they're getting spiked and everything else. We ought to start tightening up big style on these false sites. I don't know how we're going to do it. These false sites giving out false IDs need stopping and urgently, because I think they're going to cause more trouble for the youth and 16-year-olds. I think it's a major problem, and it's basically that premises. So basically, I actually have this problem, and luckily, we've got some staff of younger age which spot them and say they were still at school. And that's how they get caught out. But they'll have an ID clearly stating they're over 18. It's something I would like the police to look into.
County Councillor Clark, can I just ask, forgive me, what's your local area?
Fleetwood Fire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just to follow up to something that Councillor Ali was saying about the notice of motion, just to advise colleagues that Councillor Townley arranged a meeting last week with Councillor Beavers was there with Councillor Parr and myself, with the Police and Crime Commissioner and some of the officers. So those discussions are ongoing. Thank you.
Second that, Chairman.
I'm going to move that.
Chairman, I propose, happy to move that.
Yeah, are we all agreed? Thank you. Item 8 are items of urgent business, which there are none. But we've moved on, really. There isn't always a need for you to speak. Well, go on.
On these scrutiny topics that are coming up, sorry, am I on? Universal credit. So we've got topics for potential inclusion on the programme. When the last external scrutiny committees was meeting, the external scrutiny did a piece of work on universal credit. And it was due to be released just before the elections, but because of Purdah, it wasn't released. So it's back on here as a topic, but I don't know whether that report ever came back to external scrutiny or whether it hasn't. And it's like all that work done by the previous administration has been lost. I mean, I've read some of it because I needed some information on universal credit a few months ago, and I'm just thinking, why aren't we following up from what the work that was already done? Because I know some of our councillors that are no longer county councillors anymore, due to retirement, worked on that, worked really hard on it. So, Chair, I'm just on this agenda item, it does say topics for potential inclusion on this programme, and we've just skipped off it and gone, well, we're doing that and that's it. So I'd like to know where that's gone and why we haven't had the report back to this committee. Thank you.
Can I try and be helpful? It doesn't.
What external scrutiny did in the last 4 years is all gone and we're going on again. So we've lost the report done by external scrutiny.
Can I try and be helpful here, Chair? I know it's lunchtime, probably want your chip butty. Can I suggest that the next meeting, which is on the 11th of January 2022, that the report that was meant to come to scrutiny, which was last administration, that report on universal credit be presented and the discussion takes place around the findings of that report. I think it's really important that a piece of work was done by councillors from all groups, and that was a task and finish group as far as I remember, led by Councillor Gillian Oliver, and that work is presented to scrutiny. And I think it'll be even more important that part of the discussion can evolve from that. £1,000 that's being taken off the £20 a week off UC claimants, whether that has had an impact, and we need to discuss it. It's only right if councillors have worked hard to produce a report that all councillors get to see it and it's published, unless there's something secretive in that report and Chair, you don't want it to be presented.
I'm not even aware of the report because I wasn't the chair of this committee. But what I would say to you is, well, bear in mind what you've asked this morning.
Sorry, Chair, that's not good enough.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to have to be good.
But no, it's not. No, it's not. That's not the way a chair should be running
Well,
a meeting.
I'm
speaking, so let me finish.
Councillor Ali, just hold on. If you wait down the line, I'll tell you the problem that we have, because the date of the next meeting is already changed and it's on flood risk management.
Flood risk, yeah, I understand that, Chair, but flood risk, today we've had a couple of different items on the agenda. We had sporting business and we had the community safety partnership on one meeting. And look, nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having flood risk management alongside the UC report that we've been waiting almost 6-7 months for. I think it's only right. We can't keep pushing things on because we want to. No one's got anything to hide. It's there. A piece of work's being done. We need to know whether it's going to be on. I think if I can be useful, I think what needs to be done is that the report is assessed by yourself, Chairman, with the officers, and then you decide when you've read the report what you wish to do with it. That's what I would suggest.
Chair, can I just suggest that we're called external scrutiny, and our job is to scrutinise things. So when this item came along, I was under the impression, as a group, we would decide what we wanted on this agenda. I'm sure that it is not your duty as the chair to decide what we can and can't scrutinise. So I would ask, Chair, that you go back and get some advice from officers on what you are supposed to be doing when chairing the scrutiny meeting. Because I'd like, Chair, can I finish, please? How very rude.
No, Councillor Eden made a count. Councillor Eden made a suggestion to try and help things and asked you to read the report. And I understand that, but we'd all like to read the report, to scrutinise it. So, you know, this is external scrutiny and it's a particular function. At the moment, we're moving away from that function. And it'd be very easy for you actually to resolve this by saying, yes, at the next meeting of external scrutiny, alongside strengthening flood risk management, there will also be an item which will present that report. That's all we're asking for, and then we can discuss and debate it. Why can't you just say, I'll do that?
I've got to see, first of all, how much time the flood risk management will take. Now, if looking at benefits in Lancashire is important, then it's appropriate that we give it enough time. I will chair this committee, not you, and not County Councillor Beavers. And I'm sorry, Councillor Allen. No, I'm not being interrupted by you.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you. We've talked about meeting down if you
item 7 had already gone through.
By you, Chair.
You're not being.
You did this on health scrutiny where you shut down debate. People didn't agree.
You're not being.
You had a set time when you had to get home. I'm sorry, that's not good enough.
No.
And right to the leader of the council, because the new culture of working is about openness and transparency. What you're going back to is the dark days of Jeff Driver, where shut down debate, democracy, when you didn't want to hear it. In the meantime, you could instruct officers, as chair of external scrutiny, to publish that report. What stops you publishing this report?
Councillor.
Are these state secrets?
Councillor, you really have mutilated and destroyed what's been said. I haven't dismissed anything.
You
it's
have.
Not a case by. No, I haven't.
Well, just confirm that you'll publish the report by the end of this week.
I'm sorry, County Councillor, I'm sorry. Your opposition. You're not in control of this council, and you're not in control of this committee. Councillor Wesley.
Chairman, I think politics is crept into scrutiny.
Yeah.
Well, Councillor Eden made a sensible suggestion. I tell you that was a proposal. I would like to second that and suggest we vote on it.
Councillor Eden, would you like to repeat your suggestion?
The suggestion I made, Chair, was that you were very clear in saying they haven't seen the report, you weren't involved in it. And my suggestion was that you look at the report, you consult with officers, and then give us your view on the date, on the time it will take to discuss it and debate it in scrutiny. And the amendment is.
I've been indicated to speak to us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just think external scrutiny is what it says on the tin. We've got the terms and conditions here for scrutiny committee meetings. It doesn't say anything about how long or short meetings should be, and it doesn't say anywhere that the chairman decides exactly what's on the agenda. We've had two big issues today, and I think we all appreciate the officers that came here and the presentations that were made, extremely good presentations from both of them, and we've managed to deal with them in a fair and proper manner. There's one item on the 3 meetings a year for external scrutiny is absolutely appalling. Appalling. And then to allow only one item on the agenda, it just really is, it's unbelievable. And there's no reason at all why we can't have this. Do you mind? There's no reason at all why we can't have 2 items on an agenda and be able to deal with it.
You do need to look at the volume of the subject that we're touching. So if flood management, if it will last an hour, that's fine.
You know,
well,
a meeting on the 11th of January or whenever it's going to be, 1 item, and a meeting on the 12th of April, 1 item.
I'm sorry,
so have you decided
I am
that
not
you'll
being
change that?
told by the opposition group how we run this council. Now, there's an amendment. Well, there's an amendment. hold on, just stop playing the pantomime season too early. Councillor Ali.
By the end of this week, the report from the task and finish group should be released to all members of external scrutiny. And at that point, you also consider that then on the 11th of January, or whenever the next meeting is of external scrutiny, that is also an agenda item, item number 2, so that we can consider it and its implications. So it's very simple, saying you release the report by the end of this week. That's already done. Just need to be sent. And item 2 on the agenda, meeting external scrutiny, is the report, task and finish. Ready. I'll move that if I've got a second.
Because it seems to contradict the original motion.
Would you like me to repeat it again?
Yes.
My proposal was that as chairman, you go away, you consult with the officers, look at the report, and then decide how much time it will take and when you're going to put it on the agenda.
Do you still want to have that?
Yeah, what I'm asking you is just publish the report by the end of this week, and then obviously what Councillor Eden is saying is if we decide when it's on the agenda, that's fine.
And then we can.
But there's nothing.
There doesn't need to be a time deadline on it. There doesn't need to be a time deadline on it at all. So I would ask members to support the original motion. So those for the amendment. 3, 4, 5. Those against. 2, 3, 4, 5. So as casting vote, I'll vote against the amendment. Well, what would you do? So can we go to the original motion right now, please? Moved by Councillor Edmonds and seconded by Councillor Wesley. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? 2, 3, 4, 5. So the motion's been carried. Right, so we go to the date of the next meeting now, which is which was supposed to be on the 11th of January, but that will be on Tuesday, the 1st of March. And we look forward to seeing you all then. Well,
why is there suddenly meetings?
Can I ask, are we all in, it's 28 days actually. Are we all in favour?
No, I'm not. Sorry, this is like shut down a democracy. Right? You're saying that you haven't got enough time. You've got 3 meetings. You haven't got enough time to consider additional agenda items, and then you're putting meetings off for a couple of months. What's happening? Are we getting rid of our officers? Is there no meeting rooms to meet? What's the problem?
Yeah, it's the Environment Agency can't make the 11th of January date. This committee doesn't have the powers to require people to attend its meetings.
Why don't we change the agenda item and put universal credit on
January the 11th, go ahead with our original meeting and have the universal credit on that. In March, we can deal with the Environment Agency. That's common sense.
Yeah, but I do think you need to leave it for us to sort out.
No, it's not me, us. Who's the us?
Myself, Vice Chair of the office.
Because I'm sorry, Chair, I'm not happy with this because it's for someone who's chair who gets a responsibility allowance to be the chair of a scrutiny committee to just think he can get away with it for 3 meetings and just try and get it done quickly. Unacceptable. That is not how democracy works. Scrutiny just shouldn't work on the basis of
I have
basis. And what you're doing.
That was scheduled before.
Well, okay, well,
one meeting was taken up with a consultation.
Peter, then confirm that you'll go ahead with the general meeting. No, you're not meant to, are you?
I need, you know, I go on advice, and the advice I have been given is to move it to the 1st of March.
To say, I don't feel like I'm fulfilling my responsibilities as a councillor if we're not due to meet now until January. And then we're suddenly told, well, the people who we wanted to come that day can't come, so we're not going to meet. We'll just meet in March instead. I would implore you to leave that date in the diary so that the external scrutiny can meet. And for you, you're the chair, I accept that. But, you know, people might not always like it, but you are the chair. But to find, you know, there's other things, you know, in the work programme that could potentially be looked at that day, whether it's universal credit or anything. But just to take the date out of the diary altogether and say, well, we'll not bother meeting till March. I feel as this is the only committee I'm on, I feel suddenly that responsibility to my residents is being taken away from me again. I genuinely think if that date is in the diary, it's not beyond the wit of man for the external scrutiny committee to find something to scrutinise. There's enough going on.
The number of meetings that were planned at the beginning, and which none of your colleagues actually questioned that meetings were happening. It's just that they will be on different dates. Councillor Eden. Thank you. So I'm going to just tell you that for noting, the next meeting of the External Scrutiny Committee will be on Tuesday, 1st of March, and I will take into consideration all the suggestions you put forward this morning when I talk with the Vice Chairman and the officers. Thank you.